Ambazonia Calling. News, analysis, commentary, opinion, editorials. Ambazonia Calling is a co-production of Africa Freedom Network, the Missions Tribune, and Compass Free Press. Welcome. My name is Ntumfoyn Herbert, and I bring you revolutionary greetings from our studios in Washington, D.C. to all of you, friends of Ambazonia and fellow Ambazonians on Ground Zero and across the globe. Ambazonia Calling has seen the video from which this audio is extracted. It has gone viral on social media, and you may have seen it already. The video shows a man arrested, tortured, and bloodied on the face and on the head, allegedly by Amber boys. The tormentors can be overheard, putting pressure on the man to confess to being an undercover agent of Cameroon's dreaded secret political police. The man who speaks pidgin without the accent of one who is a francophone or a native of Ntui in the Center Province tells his tormentors that he is from Ntui. He further states that Ntui is close to Bafia, which is clearly not the case. His torturers then quickly identify him as a Yaoundé man sent by the regime to spy on Ambazonian self-defense units. The man says his only interest in the place of his arrest was his farmlands. We can hear the tormentors threaten to throw the man into a nearby river. The man pleads his case, stating that his landlord apparently was an undercover agent for the regime, and explaining that he could not alert his tormentors before a general, presumably of the army, was already on site. Then the man is made to stand on his feet. Soon after he rises, he turns and glances at a nearby river, and acting terrified, the man makes a dash for the river. His run for the edge of the river is successful. He leaps into the river and disappears from camera view. The person shooting the scene rushes with others to the edge of the road overlooking the river, and one can hear at least 5 bullets fired, presumably targeting the man in the river. One can hear the tormentors describe the man as a fish, suggesting that he will swim to safety. Ambazonia Calling decries all forms of torture and extrajudicial executions, whether perpetrated by the colonial regime, as on the audio of the video we played to you at the beginning of our program last week, or by so-called Amber boys, or those pretending to be Amber boys that are seen on the video whose audio we are playing to you now. It seems clear in this particular video that those shooting it insisted on identifying the origin of the victim, even though his accent does not suggest he is from Yaoundé or from Ntui, and it seems that this would have been in the hope of setting up intercommunal violence. Ambazonia Calling reminds all parties involved in the war in Ambazonia that a special tribunal will feel convinced about this. A special tribunal will one day be set up to try all those guilty of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and human rights violations in Ambazonia. True freedom fighters do not torture. They do not order or implement extrajudicial executions. Anyone claiming to offer self-defense for the people of Ambazonia must distinguish themselves by not committing the same crimes as the terrorist forces of the colonizer. This is an Ambazonia Calling public service announcement.
This is Ambazonia Calling.
There is a lot to get through in this edition, so let's get started without further ado. There is no better place to start than with our editorial. This week has seen more audio messages than several weeks combined. The main characteristic of every audio and video message by Ambazonians is that they are not targeted to win support from anyone in the international community. Ambazonians are talking to themselves. Every Ambazonian leader is masturbating their ego in endless social media speeches that do not even start the car meant to take the revolution to BOYO. Here is Lambert Bomb.
Words matter. We are at war. This is a revolution. These are some of the fun excuses some activists for the independent struggle of Ambazonia are peddling these days. And yes, we are at war. But what war? And who are the we? Any keen observer of Ambazonians will quickly notice how glibly and loosely these words are bandied in the struggle. Clearly, this war is no longer just an us against them, but also, and sadly, a we against the us. There are multiple voices clamoring for audience and control, and the best this has become is a cacophony. Empty vessels making very loud noise. Unfortunately, just as we have not been strategic in using our very limited resources, so too have we also continued to waste time and energy trying to outsmart each other on social media. No doubt, we have remained outside the corridors of power, screaming and tearing each other down, hoping that bystanders will listen and sieve the wheat from the weed. Yes, we are at war. It is a war that has gone viral on WhatsApp and Facebook as we worship and dance on Sundays in front of the White House, outside the United Nations, or Capitol Hill. The recent cacophony ignited by the now infamous so-called communications secretary with a bully pulpit from where he attempts on behalf of the us to rubbish the we is a sad moment. Everybody has become a spokesperson for the Ambazonia struggle, but unfortunately, we all are singing beautifully outside the choir. And as they say, too many cooks truly spoil the broth. Yes, we have compounded the war, and the fissures keep multiplying. It is the us in the IG against the we in ARC. It is the us in the diaspora against the we on Ground Zero. It is the us in the Ambazonia Self-Defense Council versus the we in the Ambazonia Defense Forces. It is us, the Red Dragons, versus we, the Tigers. No, it is no longer just us against them. It is no longer restorationists versus the colonial occupier. Not even restorationists versus the federalists. It is unfortunately restorationists versus restorationists. It has become a shouting game, and while one could mistake this for a repeat of the biblical Tower of Babel or the Pentecost experience, where they spoke in different tongues and yet understood each other, this has simply become a dramatic instantiation of hate speech. Silence, they say, is golden, and like those wise words of the Desiderata enjoin us, avoid loud and aggressive persons. They are a vexation to the spirit. The Irish statesman Edmund Burke rightly noted that the only thing necessary for evil to exist is for good people to remain silent. And so we must not and cannot be silent and allow others to take us for granted and prosecute the revolution and the war to a screeching halt. We must criticize each other, but this must be done in charity and in truth. Ambazonians must learn that brothers and sisters fight with elbows and not with fists. The time has come for us to use the barrel of our pens and the AK-47s of our mouths to internationalize the Ambazonian struggle. For example, could you consider recording an audio message and sending that to the UN about the genocide that the colonial gangsters of La République are committing on Ambazonians? Call your local radio station and talk about the Ambazonian crisis. In everything, we must never forget that this war is not an us against we, but rather us against them. The next time you say we are at war, ask yourself what war you are talking about and who the we are. We, Ambazonians, are at war against the repressive colonial occupation of La République. I hope every true Ambazonian remembers that beyond listening to this editorial. Lambert, Mom for Ambazonia Calling.
This is Ambazonia Calling.
This was another week of continued carnage, war crimes, atrocity crimes and crimes against humanity in Ambazonia. Eyewitness accounts from MANYU in the northern zone say they have spotted bodies floating down the MENCHUM River in images that are terrifying and that evoke the Rwanda genocide, especially because bodies have also been reported on the River Muom in the Belo area, on the MANYU River in NDIAN state in the southern zone. 8 bodies were dumped at the roadside in a Kiliwindi just outside Kumba in Meme state in the southern zone this week, and the bodies of a woman and her 2 children slaughtered, as well as the bodies of 13 mostly young men, reportedly Amber fighters, were discovered in Chomba in the wake of raids by terrorist colonial forces of Paul Biya, who acknowledged the killings in a French-language report by saying the 13 they found were neutralized. Here is Innocent with the first part of our news wrap-up of the week.
Ambazonia has gained admission into the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization, UNPO, whose annual conference wrapped up this weekend in Savoy, France. On Friday 14th, a high-powered Ambazonian delegation led by AGC Vice President Dr. Nyi, in collaboration with ARC, signed the membership pledge of honor against the backdrop of the floating Ambazonian flag. Dr. Larry Ayamba has been commissioned ambassador to the organization and will be spearheading diplomatic offensives that should lead to outcomes like for Estonia, East Timor, and Georgia, all former members of the UNPO that have graduated to the League of Nations at the United Nations. Sources are tallying that close to 30 the number of unarmed Ambazonians slaughtered Tuesday the 11th by the Biya Genocidal Task Force in Chomba, a near suburb of Bamenda in Ambazonia's northern zone. Observers are pointing out the way the guns were placed on the butchered men, suggesting that these are the same guns that La République du Cameroon had earlier seized from the farming community. In Bafut, Prince Hansen Force Cameroon News Agency at CameroonNewsAgency.com is reporting scores of casualties of the forces of La République du Cameroon as with Ambazonian Restoration Forces. According to their sources, La République du Cameroon lost 15 men and hardware, while Restoration Forces lost 11 men. Just the day before, it was Black Monday in Boya, where Restoration Forces were in a protracted shootout with Biya occupation forces. Engulfing flames reportedly decimated the special branch offices of Cameroon's paramilitary in Ilak, Oku, as well as the office of the Colonial Divisional Officer. Ambazonia Calling has not independently verified allegations that several gendarmes may have died in the fire. Meantime, a severely injured survivor with face slashed into half and a gaping hole between his mouth and right ear is sharing testimony of his kidnapping, along with several other young men who were killed Friday in Banja, Bamenda, by police officers. The survivor says police officers apprehended them in mile 90 but carried out the summary executions at Banja. Motor parks from Bamenda to Boya in the northern and southern zones of Ambazonia cannot fill fast enough as thousands flee from their homes to the safety of friends and family in La République du Cameroon. The exodus has been precipitated by a 12-hour curfew by the colonial governor of La République du Cameroon in Ambazonia's northern zone, even as his colleague in the southern zone already sent his family to safety in La République du Cameroon. The colonial governor of Ambazonia's northern zone, Adolphe Lele Lafrique, is fighting for his job. In an interview with VOA, he went all out pleading with Ambazonian restorationists to surrender their weapons and crown Pharaoh Biya at the upcoming presidential elections come October 7th. Stay tuned. We will be right back with more items of what made news in Ambazonia over the past week. I am Innocent Chia, and you're listening to Ambazonia Calling.
Ahead of Saturday, Bernard Okalia Bilai, known for calling Ambazonians dogs, pleaded with the same dogs to stay by and participate in the selection or election due to hold next October 7. The dog trainer-in-chief claimed that elections would be a chance for the dogs of Ambazonia to democratically express their disgruntlement with the colonial regime. The only trouble being that the colonial governor does not want to admit that rejecting to participate in such an election is also expressing disgruntlement. Here is Innocent Chia with the second part of our news wrap-up for the week.
Hopes of collaboration among Ambazonian frontline liberation groups in the diaspora has suffered almost irredeemable damage as leaders make claims and counterclaims regarding funds raised weeks ago at a rally in Washington, D.C. The IG has not accounted for the funds raised, and nearly every other group has dissociated from the funds. Rhetoric by Chris Anu of the IG group to fragment and destroy collaboration among ground zero forces while delegitimizing the vast majority of them has met with an ironclad directive from Dr. Lucas Ayabacho, Commander-in-Chief of the Ambazonia Defense Forces, ADF. Effective September 15, the directive reads, quote, Ambazonia Defense Forces will take into custody any civilian or groups of civilians appointed by a group claiming to act as the government of the people of Ambazonia, end quote. 2 men allegedly working for Paul Atanganji, Cameroon's rogue Minister of Territorial Administration, have reportedly admitted to the demolition of 5 MEZAM interurban buses, destroying a caterpillar, killing 1 person and robbing the passengers. Following a tip-off, they were intercepted by restoration forces on the highway in Ginicom leading towards Fundong in the northern zone. Cameroon's forces of occupation reportedly raided casualty wards at the Bamenda General Hospital Monday night, where they were said to have been searching for patients with gunshot wounds. Accounts say they seized cell phones from doctors, nurses, and demanded that the surgeon produce all the bullets that had been retrieved from the victims. Finally, SDF leader Nijon Frundi has been released after over 6 hours of detention by Amber boys. The chairman of the SDF was returning from his farm in Womb midweek when his car was pulled over and taken to an undisclosed location for a tete-a-tete. According to reliable sources that opted to be anonymous, the restoration forces told the chairman that he had been given numerous chances to be on the side of the revolution, but he blew his chances. This is Innocent Chia for Ambazonia Calling.
This is the last weekend for prospective investors to buy shares in Africa Freedom Network, the Pan-African radio television network on which Ambazonia Calling is hosted and will air going forward. If you are on Africa Freedom Network on WhatsApp, you know all that is required to know to join. If you are not on that forum but are interested to buy shares, send an email to ambercalling@yahoo.com. Time is running out. Do not be like those who were given a chance but failed to buy into the shares at Apple, Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, and others. It is not in doubt anymore that the Ambazonia restoration quest may have hit rock bottom, evident notably by a leadership vacuum. We asked Barrister Sia Jimveambe to research the topic, and she came back with many answers, but also one big question. Here is her report.
The word leader has become very contemporary and prevalent in the mouths of Ambazonians. Some have been hailed leaders at one point or another by others, and some have boldly affixed the much coveted title to themselves. However, truth be told, in the midst of all the hailing and self-proclamations, many Ambazonians lament that there is a huge leadership crisis or vacuum in the Ambazonia liberation struggle. As many regrettably observe, both the hailed and the self-proclaimed have fallen short of good leadership. Ambazonia Calling reached out to some of these disillusioned Ambazonians to find out directly from them what exactly they consider to be good qualities of a leader that they were not seeing in the present Ambazonia leadership. We ended up with a laundry list of qualities and expectations, including integrity, transparency, accountability, good judgment, good decision-making ability, a willingness to evaluate and change direction as needed for the greater good of the nation, knowledgeable, confident, competent, visionary, having the ability to adopt a common vision that transcends self-interest and personal gain. Humility, having the ability to persuade others to set aside their personal agenda and work towards a common goal. One who understands that their responsibility is to build strong institutions that last beyond their terms of leadership and not to be the institution themselves. One who coordinates, collaborates, and delegates. Interestingly, these Ambazonians also affirm that the absence of good qualities of leadership stem largely from the lack of credibility and legitimacy, given that any leader who truly, transparently, and democratically receives the mandate of leadership from Ambazonians would know that they were mere servants of the people who gave them the mandate, would be accountable to the people, and would conduct themselves according to the tenets, guidelines, and expectations of the people who gave them the mandate in the first place. Such leadership would also gain credibility and respect of the international community and would be better placed to speak knowledgeably, with confidence and strength on behalf of the people of Ambazonia. We at Ambazonia Calling totally agree with this reasoning. Every leadership of the century, well-intended or not, including even the leadership of La République du Cameroon, understands the value of legitimacy obtained through a democratic electoral process, whether free and fair or not, whether conducted during a revolution or not. The challenge for Ambazonians, therefore, is to put in place leadership that has a mandate obtained through a transparent electoral process. As the saying goes, one must make lemonade with the lemons that one has and not those that one aspires to have. Catalonia made its lemonade by carrying out an election even within the throes of a revolution. Estonia, Namibia, these countries have successfully carried out online voting. We have our lemons. Why are we not making lemonade? What is stopping Ambazonians from putting in place legitimate leadership, democratically mandated through a secure online voting platform, for instance? What is stopping us? What is really, really stopping us? See Ajimbo Ambe for Ambazonia Calling.
Welcome to our special interview segment, The Devil Unmasked, The Truth Out. Welcome, Professor Tata Menta. Every week we try to unmask the devil. Given the sheer evil the devil has been visiting on our people, maybe we should be nailing the devil to the cross.
Thanks, Ntumfoyn, and let us put the devil on the cross together.
Many true and false prophets of peace are half honestly, half mockingly calling for peace, really meaning for some of them that they do not care for the justice on which peace is built. What is your take on these peace initiatives?
Let me tell you honestly, there has never been anything like peace in what became independence by joining. A violent containment of the anger of despair does not amount to peace, except you are talking of peace of the graveyard. Can one talk of peace without justice? No. It's ridiculous.
What is peace then?
Peace, as we know, is the summum bonum, so we must know its negative as well as positive meanings. Today, the Satanic Republic of Cameroon is suffering from multiple crises such as widespread corruption, state terrorism, denial of human rights, crimes against humanity, economic inequality, and calculated impoverishment by members of the National Stealing League, ethnic discrimination, linguistic and cultural intolerance, oppression of the weak. Who can they say that peace exists under such circumstances in demonic Cameroon?
What of the women of the Day of Lamentation in Bamenda and some of our brothers and sisters of the Cameroon Peace Initiative?
It is mere manipulation by a murderous state. President Paul Biya declared war against the targeted group to be exterminated to stabilize his tottering regime. He rented mercenaries from France, Chad, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, Central African Republic, Congo, to crush his enemies within at most 2 weeks, as he expected. That is where we are today, with Biya's peace initiatives being peddled around by his running dogs in desperation.
Please remind me and everyone else listening, how exactly did we get here again?
Ntumfoyn, the foundation for this carnage was laid with the evil independence by joining. When Southern Cameroons voted to join the Republic of Cameroon, French President Charles de Gaulle gave President Amadou Ahidjo 2 assignments. First, make sure you are never a president of 2 countries at once. 2, make sure that you crush the economic might of Southern Cameroons as they will use it to challenge you.
Did Ahidjo follow these instructions to the letter in your opinion?
Very readily in Ntumfoyn, Ahidjo being an African Gaullist.
Now take us down memory lane with regard to the economic destruction of Southern Cameroon's Ambazonia.
Ntumfoyn, let us take them systematically. First, Ahidjo organized his champagne-popping, dancing and womanizing jamboree called the Fumban Constitutional Conference. He arrogantly presented his French-crafted constitution to Southern Cameroon delegates, and shortly after that, he unilaterally declared his federal republic without taking into consideration the suggestions the Southern Cameroon delegates made. On September 30, 1961, he unleashed his murderous and unruly gendarmes and military to occupy Southern Cameroon under the guise of pursuing fleeing Maquisards from East Cameroon. Following our independence on the 1st of October 1961, he decreed federal inspectors of administration to counter the power of the West Cameroon government. He thus created a protocol problem. Who was to come first, the Prime Minister of West Cameroon or the federal inspector? This was not enough. In September 1966, he dissolved all political parties and installed his political machine called the CNU. Further, in 1972, he illegally abolished the federation that was never even documented at the United Nations. President Paul Biya worsened the situation by reenacting his cherished Satanic Republic of Cameroon that obtained its independence with frozen boundaries as of 1st January 1960. That is how the fictitious union stumbled from one illegality to another until President Paul Biya decided to exterminate those he calls insignificant minority called Anglophones by declaring open war on November 30th, 2017.
Did all these schemes also affect the private sector in West Cameroon?
Ntumfoyn, let us start with the ambushing and smashing of the economic might of the state of West Cameroon. Following the so-called independence by joining, Ahidjo seized all money-making departments like customs, finance from the state of West Cameroon and closed down Tico International Airport and Victoria Deep Sea Ports. The 185 billion francs in the hands of the marketing board was seized by Ahidjo, and he used that to balloon his budget. Then he put the West Cameroon government on drips of financial subventions from the federal government. You can now understand why Ahidjo had a running conflict with Prime Minister Augustin Ngomjua. Hence, Ahidjo decreed out Prime Minister Ngomjua and replaced him with Pa St. Muna. Fake commissions of inquiry were instituted to demonstrate that the West Cameroon government was a bastion of corruption. That is how Ahidjo seized the West Cameroon Development Agency, PowerCam, Women Area Development Agency, Santati, and name it. And that was how he dislocated the economic might or spinal cord of the West Cameroon government. Just see how they crushed CAMBank, for example, the most highly capitalized bank in West Africa at the time. It could even give loans of 1 million francs, whereas if one wanted a loan only of 500,000 francs from any of the French banks in East Cameroon, it had to be authorized by Paris. As those who fell over one another for loans from CAMBank, like Sadu Ayato, how they spirited away the resources of CAMBank. The last straw was when the West Cameroon State Lottery was taken over to Yaoundé. The resources were looted by members of the Satanic Republic's National Stealing League and collapsed the West Cameroon State Lottery. The businessmen in West Cameroon were targeted for crippling. The Menyolis, Nangas, Chairs, Nebas, Kilos, and Nim were systematically crushed. No dime was paid to any of these contractors who borrowed money from banks and they used to execute government contracts. Let me give you an example. Do you know that Kilo was the one responsible for the mail delivery system in West Cameroon in those days? And as far back as 1960s, mails were already being delivered at home in Tico. This systematic economic genocide continued even into the 90s. You remember Lawrence Thatcher meticulously nursed Amity Bank, using his resume as a renowned mathematician and business banker of Chase Manhattan. The Amity Bank attracted such robust financial resources that the French banks were threatened and ordered their errand boys in the Satanic Republic of Cameroon to sink Amity Bank immediately. They did, and they got Thatcher into New Bear prison to offer them time to use state resources to come up with Bank Atlantique, a shadow of Amity Bank.
And did they touch on other sectors?
The most devastating one, Ntumfoyn, was that what I may call menticide, or the destruction of people's brain power. Since the satanic Yaoundé gangsters refused to give subventions for our mission schools, teachers were going for months without salaries. Hence, the quality of education dropped at primary and secondary school levels. The Yaoundé demons made sure that John Gu Foncha's dream of an American-type College of Arts, Science and Technology was crushed. When the demons discovered that caste was producing folks who sought to American universities on brilliantly graduating from Bambili, the then principal Sylvester Dio was kicked out and replaced by Omar Yembe. Then caste became Lycée de Bambili. When it was discovered that Dr. Ako Mengot was still sending brilliant students abroad using the African Scholarship Program for American universities, he was sent to a museum in Yaoundé as Director of Idleness. The Yaoundé demons did the same with the British Commonwealth Scholarship Programs. These demonic ruses to execute menticide followed the reality that the insignificant minority was becoming intellectually and professionally very powerful and had to be stopped.
And one last question for you here, Prof. What should Ambazonians do now?
Ntumfoyn, let me say it categorically and unequivocally. Satan can never show anyone the way to heaven for salvation. Ambazonians must finish the job of their national liberation sooner than later. That is their only road to paradise. Living Together Peace initiatives are revised standard versions of the Fumban deceit. Being fooled a second time is unforgivable.
Thank you very much, Professor Tatamenta.
Thank you.
This is Ambazonia Calling.
Ambazonians are longing for the moment when even one country recognizes their homeland. The hope that forming, supporting, or lining up behind an interim government or a de facto authority would help. One that is elected by the people. Here is Jude Agua, Ozogen, with an analysis that you will hear only here on Ambazonia Calling.
At the risk of sounding like a broken record, those of us here at Ambazonia Calling cannot tire from repeating that it is our responsibility to find solutions, not evoke excuses to avoid doing what is necessary. It is clear that the election of a legitimate leadership for Ambazonia will constitute a key image-building exercise and a major building block of the kind of legitimacy we will need to bring any country to recognize Ambazonia. Even without electing the head of an Ambazonian government in exile, a plebiscite such as the one suggested and launched by Maurice in early September last year could have helped prove to the well and bare-bone skeptics that an overwhelming majority of our people support independence and, by extension, that those hidden calls to vote recognize a particular institution as their de facto authority. There is a level of corruption and international criminality involved in the abduction and rendition of the leaders of the interim government groups from Nigeria back into La Republique. However, that political embarrassment resulted in part from the absence of IG's officials negotiating and sealing a host country agreement with Nigeria. Today's IG is based in the United States, and they are in much the same situation as the one that was once based in Nigeria. IG's officials are the first to recognize that they have not settled the question of legitimacy. In an interview with the British Broadcasting Corporation (BBC) on October 1, 2017, Sisiko Ayoktabe was caught off guard and he stumbled through an incoherent response to the question on legitimacy. Similarly, at a press conference in DC in August 2018, Comrade Sako proved to be unprepared, slack-jawed, and bewildered as he gasped for word and stumbled on the same question on recognition for Ambazonia. How can the situation be remedied? The International Court of Justice advisory opinion on Bosnia stressed that power must flow from the free expression of the will of the people through credible, legitimate, and democratic processes. The very best instrument for building legitimacy is free and fair, periodic elections conducted by universal and equal suffrage and by secret ballot. I know that supporters of the IG will dismiss this view. They will argue that we are in a revolution, so no election can be held. If that is indeed true, are supporters of that view not also admitting that in a revolution there is no interim government? I'm just asking. This is Jude Agua Ozugen from Ambazonia Calling.
Do not go away yet, Tanyo Ozugen. I have one question for you. What do you think must be done? What would you recommend?
Name any jurist and they probably have an opinion on this. We have picked French jurist, law professor, and Judge René Cassin. Based on real cases, Judge Cassin has found that countries recognize a government in exile if that government in exile is considered representative of the national will. The recognition of a government in exile requires that it shows a sufficient quality by which it seems an emanation of the community for which it intends to act. When institutions claiming to be de facto governments fail to unite and build partnership with other organizations committed to the same cause, they generally fail to win recognition. This was the fate of the French government in exile based in London during the Second World War. That French government in exile failed to win recognition despite the fact that it was a partner with the Allied forces working hand in glove with Western countries in combating Hitler. There is the case of the Albanian government in exile. On January 20, 1943, the U.S. Department of State disappointed Mr. Peter Kalina, the acting representative in Washington of King Zog of Albania. In reply to Mr. Kalina's application to the Department of State to extend recognition to King Zog as head of the Albanian government in exile, the U.S. Department of State said in a response that recognition of a particular group outside of Albania would raise the questions of which group actually represented the Albanian people. The U.S. Department added that there was no Albanian authority abroad able to muster sufficient strength to lay any substantial claim to represent either resistant forces within the country or unified Albanian groups abroad. Recognition was consequently denied. Based on that one case, recognition will be denied in our case right now. That is why we continue to argue here at Ambazonia Calling that the present political dispensation with KUPE IG presenting itself as the Ambazonian interim government is a political parody. To be doing a good job in campaigning for recognition, any institution playing the interim government will be keen, even very anxious to build unity, partnership, and collaboration. We will actively seek to support all groups at home and abroad, including self-defense groups. It will begin by doing everything needed to win recognition from Ambazonia groups before even dreaming of obtaining recognition from other countries. We can therefore state without any risk of contradiction that the current IG is working even unbeknownst to it against the same goal it seeks to achieve. And that is, to say the least, truly unfortunate. Jude Agua Ozugen for Ambazonia Calling.
Ambazonia Calling. You are in the heart of the news shrine. Call us the Kalakuta Republic of commentary, opinion, and editorials. Last Sunday, the highway between Bamenda and Bafoussam was severed, and MEZAM buses seem to have been singled out for destruction. Here is Willy Bratade with an analysis of what happened, why it was not an attack by Amber Boys, and why the colonial regime is trying so hard to throw MEZAM under the bus.
There is no doubting that the Cameroonese government is responsible for the September 8th attack in Akoum. that saw the destruction of 5 buses belonging to the MEZAM travel agency. Multiple sources, topped by an unimpeachable source, confirmed to Ambazonia Calling that after the destruction of some trucks at the Satom Construction Company staging area some weeks ago, the government started dispatching, at the expense of any company that so desired, armed paramilitary officers to guard their sites round the clock. Apart from the improbability that Ambazonia Defense Forces were responsible for this attack, given that country Sunday, when everything is grounded, was just a day away, consider the following: that the 5th Joint Military Region and the 5th Gendarmerie Region for the Northwest and West regions, with headquarters in Bamenda, is located at Up Station, that the governor's office and residence are located in the same neighborhood, and that it takes less than 30 minutes to drive from there to the scene of the attack. In addition, there has been a 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew in the Northwest for quite some time, and there are at least 2 permanent checkpoints from Up Station to Santa. With this backdrop, we would like to ask the following questions. How come there was no intervention from the army or the gendarmerie during the entire operation that lasted some 3 hours, according to eyewitness reports? How could 300 supposed Amber boys on foot stop hundreds of vehicles, force thousands of passengers to lie down in the rain, collect their phones, check their IDs, just vanish without any trace at the end of their operation? Logistically, you need about 6 to 10 30 to 50-seater vehicles to transport that many people. Regarding the equipment that was used to destroy the road and the buses, where were the guards of the Burns Construction Company when the alleged Amber boys stole the excavator? Why didn't they alert the security forces? Considering how slowly those excavators move, can you imagine how long it took for it to dig the trench and then proceed to destroy the buses? And the million-dollar question: why did it take the army and gendarmes more than 6 hours to respond to an attack that happened less than 30 minutes away from the Joint Regional Headquarters? Our source, a senior military officer, put it bluntly, quote, "My colleagues are dressed in uniform during the day and are hired thugs at night," end quote. How else do you explain that the only video of the scene that has gone viral, full with live running commentary, was filmed in the presence of the same terrorist soldiers who routinely examine the contents of civilians' phones and arrest those who have any videos, pictures, or messages about the so-called Anglophone crisis? Social media is abuzz with information that the destruction of the MEZAM buses was payback for that company's refusal to cooperate with the government to transport voters from Douala and Bafoussam to Bamenda during the October 7 elections. The reason the company cited was the perilous nature of the assignment and the losses they already incurred as a result of their past cooperation with the government. Finally, Amber boys are said to have arrested 2 Cameroonese men on their way to Frundi, who confessed to being a part of the gang that carried out the Akum attack. Like they say, there is no such thing as a perfect crime. Willibrod Ade for Ambazonia Calling.
Following up on that report by Willibrod Ade, I have to regrettably add that an outrageous number of abuses have been inflicted on the Mbororo community by, among others, persons identified as Ambazonian freedom fighters. Those attacking the Mbororo community have accused them of being pro-La République forces. The abuses, it cannot be stressed enough, can never be justified and are completely unacceptable no matter their origin. Besides the execution of Mbororo herdsmen, which has happened, besides extortion of huge sums of money, besides the stealing of cattle, besides the destruction of their property and threats to throw them out of their land, the latest abuses include a ban imposed by so-called Amber boys on 18 Bororo men who work as transporters on the Bamenda-Mbengui Road. In one very sad case, so-called Amber fighters detained Bororo men and women traveling to a funeral in Mbengui. Across several villages in Momo State, an association fostering the rights of Bororo community has documented more abuses, including the ban in at least 5 villages on Okada riders to transport citizens of Mboro descent. In one case, reported to the FBI, an Ambazonian who works as a nurse in Maryland has been called to order for posting messages inciting others to attack members of the Mboro community. Ambazonia Calling denounces such discrimination and targeted victimization of the Mboros or any other ethnic group, and remind all Ambazonians that we owe ourselves the duty to protect everyone's life, to recognize and uphold the sanctity of life, unless in case of legitimate self-defense.
This is Ambazonia Calling.
Anyone who has been paying attention to the ongoing war in the Cameroons would readily admit that war crimes, atrocity crimes, and crimes against humanity have been committed. The Biya regime has even engaged in the mother of all crimes, genocide, as Barrister Manjong Judambe now reports.
Most of us were witnesses to the angelic voices of the choir closing the funeral service this week in Accra, Ghana, for Mr. Kofi Atta Annan, the former United Nations Secretary General. Mr. Kofi Annan was 80 years old. His legacy will forever be stained by his failure as the then director of the United Nations peacekeeping forces to stop the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. Mr. Kofi Annan never ever tried to hide the guilt of the United Nations. Famously, Mr. Kofi Annan said, "Genocide begins when an individual is killed, not for what he or she has done, but for who they are." Unarguably, that is what is happening in Ambazonia today. The people of Ambazonia, a distinct nation and a distinct people from their neighbors of La République du Cameroon, are being killed for no other reason than for being Ambazonians and insisting to define themselves as such. Once more, the United Nations under Antonio Guterres and other organizations that should have been yelling bloody murder are, to quote Kenya's Professor Lumumba, very eloquent in their silence. The silence of the African Union or African uselessness has not gone unnoticed. The United Kingdom and France, directly responsible for the mess, are deaf and mute to the carnage and genocidal violence. Neighbors, Nigeria, Chad, Central African Republic, and Equatorial Guinea are guilty of aiding and abetting the international conspiracy. Genocide in Ambazonia is no historical mistake. No, not at all. Evidence abounds that it is a scheme. The United Kingdom, France, the African Union, the Commonwealth, the United Nations, and their various gold status recipients are cheering on the warmongers, the baby killers, the state-sponsored rapists, and their official killer squads. Few bold voices have arisen to decry these crimes. They are radio personality Masanga of Punchline Africa and the bishops of the Bamenda Ecclesiastical Province. Needless stressing that they've been ignored. This begs the question, what must Ambazonians do to defend and protect themselves as the genocide rages on? At Ambazonia Calling, it is our firm conviction Ambazonians must protect themselves and their families. By this we mean self-defense, not retributive killings. No one, no government, no mortal, no individual has the right to summarily execute persons they disagree with, and Ambazonians must do everything to defend themselves against an international community that vilifies Ambazonians while practically canonizing and sanctifying Paul Biya and his genocidal colonial regime from Yaoundé. They have already built an altar, fetched the firewood, and are looking at Ambazonians to burn as sacrificial lambs of imperialism. Ambazonians must not let them get away with this. They must be strong, determined, firm, and clear, but they must also prove to the world that they are acting legally. Therefore, they must always remain non-violent, unless when forced to defend themselves. Manjong Judambe for Ambazonia Calling.
We don't do foolish, but when there are capital fools out there, we make it our duty to find them, and every week we crown one of them the Nyamfuka of the Week. It is never easy to determine winners of this award, but this week it was particularly tough. There were so many candidates for so few winning spots. Here now is Veronique Vitimfe with the rundown of the queens and kings of Fulj for this week.
Finishing in third place this week is a group of three. The first is an activist. This week, he loudly professed his belief that only citizens from the southern zone should lead Ambazonia's quest for independence. If your guess was that this activist is Capo Daniel, congratulations. That is who we're talking about. The second co-winner is another activist journalist. This week, he continued his call for the Ambazonia revolution to be prosecuted along tribal lines. Along so-called county-by-county approach, complete with use of dialects, the real fact hidden in plain sight is that this county-by-county approach, advocated by Eric Tato, is essentially conceptualized to torpedo the block-by-block approach. The third co-winner is the so-called Cameroon Peace Initiative, which this week claimed to be providing a genuine contribution towards resolving the crisis in Cameroon, while at the same time stating that the crisis is a mere matter of perception. The three, Capo Daniel, Eric Tato, and the Cameroon Peace Initiative, are this week's co-third place finishers for the Nyamfuka of the week. In the position of runners-up are two leaders of this revolution. One of them, Chris Anu, has become a near-permanent fixture on Nyamfuka. He has been nominated almost every week, but this week, yet again, he is a co-second place finisher for his outrageous outings, accusing other leaders based on false information and falsified accounts regarding management of funds raised for Ground Zero. The second co-winner has never been nominated. She is on Ambazonia Calling. This week, she allowed her frustration at the leaders accused falsely of doing the wrong thing to get the better of her usually calm self. The chairlady of ARC, Catherine Fomango, let her temper run after John Ba Akuro as she mistook false accusations for gospel. For giving legs to false information and falsified accounts, Chris Anu and Catherine Fomango are this week's co-runners-up for Nyamfuka of the week. Running away with the crown this week is an organization whose leaders have arrogated to themselves a prominent position in the pursuit of Ambazonia's restoration quest. Normally, many expect this organization to provide leadership, to foster partnership, to work more closely with other organizations, to recognize that political power in this revolution rests with the people. Many Ambazonians expect this organization, especially after the events of last August in Washington, D.C., to be at the heart of efforts to foster collaboration with other movements. Unfortunately, that organization has spent the past week falsely accusing other leaders of seeking to pocket funds meant for Ground Zero, revealing thus that its claim of wanting to collaborate is really a code for demanding that all other movements close shop and join them. They could not be happy until they repeat Ahijo's trick of collapsing other parties into the CNU in 1966. To end a week when it could not stop doing foolish, this organization claimed that no other self-defense group on Ground Zero has any recognition. If your guess is that we're talking about the IG, well, you are right. By acting in a manner that reaffirms his belief, stated in a video gone viral, that this revolution should be led by a dictator, Dr. Samuel Sako and the IG are this week's undisputable winners of the crown of shame, the Nyamfuka of the week. Veronique Vitimfe for Ambazonia Calling.
For more stories from around the world, go to the World Wide Web at themissionstribune.com, CompassFreePress.com, and AfricaFreedomNetwork.com.
Here is our letter to Joshua.
Dear Joshua, it has been a week already, and you are yet to provide answers to the questions I emailed to you last Sunday. I need answers, Joshua. Enough of the bebet. You need to come clean. Let me remind you of my questions. Why did your thugs in uniform seize heavy-duty equipment from Satom last Saturday night, breaking Sunday? Why did they tear down a part of the cow track you still call the Bamenda-Bafoussam Highway? How come your occupation forces stationed at Satom itself, but also at Upstation only 6 miles away, how come they did not drive to mile 8 Akum to restore order? Or was it not a case of trouble à l'ordre public? Did you and your colonial hooligans in uniform think that you could fool the world that easily? Who exactly did you think was going to believe that a non-state actor would be able to block off a major cow track like the Bamenda-Bafoussam Potopoto track for hours and then vandalize it without being stopped by your kill first, aim later troops? Even KUPE the route in the 3 northern regions of your banana republic did not come up with a scheme consisting of excavating the entire road while taking great care not to cut off any utility lines, notably no disruptions to the telecommunications line and the internet lines on which your killer squads are dependent to maintain you in power. Everyone knows, Joshua, not only who perpetrated the crime last Saturday night at Mile 8 Akum, but also and most importantly, who benefited from the crime. You, Joshua, even the oracle of Isingan in your native Mvomaka and across your native South region has found out that you need deliverance from the hands of the unholy one. Your hands are dripping with the blood of not only the 6,000 plus Ambazonians that you have killed so far in this war, but also with the blood of the poor MEZAM driver who spoke French and was killed in the hope that you could cause the gullible to think that Ambazonians are killing Francophones. You lie, Joshua. You are the only one caught with your blood-soaked fingers in the man-eater cookie jar. Being caught in the act is a miserable thing, but that is what happens to you when you hire jailbirds and school dropouts to counsel you on how to be genocidaire. Your Minister of Territorial Terrorism probably told you that he was a qualified criminal for this act because he is a son of the soil. Do you remember how he reassured you that his boys and girls will be able to pull the whole thing off under the cover of darkness and melt into the night, undetected, unidentified, and leaving the entire territory to wake up the next morning with no one else to blame but the Ambazonian restoration movement, around whose neck he was hoping and swearing he could hang the crime? Easier said than done, Joshua. Don't tell me the jailbirds and school dropouts now play you like Songo. You have to be extra dense upstairs to believe that the world is as gullible as the territorial terrorism boss says it is. It was not enough, as you can see now, to have manipulated the media to be right there and in advance to cover the scoop. You tried, Joshua, you hear me? So you first invited all those key reporters, including stringers for the international broadcast outlets like the BBC, to come to Bamenda the day before, on Friday, to cover that fake lamentation day by the CPDM women pretending to want peace by encouraging your regime to prepare for and pursue war against our people. Once the reporters were in Bamenda, timing was the next thing. You had to wait for the reporters to be headed out of town the next day, Saturday, back to Yaoundé and Douala. You thought this would be a walk in the park, a slam dunk. They tear to, as they say in Gola. The road would be severe. The reporters will be already there in one of the buses, or they will be within reach. They would just have to run up from their hotel in Bamenda town to cover the breaking news. Then you would very predictably call up your PR firm and lobbyists in Washington, D.C. and commandeer them to get the story into propaganda-inclined outlets like Fox News. You even got the BBC for the first time since the beginning of your adventure in propaganda with Bush House, London, to state without proof that the vandalization of the cow track was done by Amber boys. Joshua, you there, your own no small. They don't call you Le Petit Piment de Mvomaka for nothing, I see. The only trouble with that self-inflicted wound on the Bamenda-Bafoussam highway is that you employed an unqualified Al Capone for the crime. The poor Minister of Territorial Terrorism has one important handicap. It is half-book. Unlike half a loaf of bread, which fills the stomach of a hungry man, half-book is poison to the brain. It is a disease whose most visible symptoms are in the Guinness record holder of failure at the GCE, Ekema Patrick, and dropout from St. Bede's College Ashing, Paul Atanganji. These two are the main reasons why, although Ambazonian leaders campaign for schools to be closed, they might consider reopening if the two of them promise to enroll and to stay in school. I know my advice does not count, but look, Joshua, if you don't even take my advice, at least take yours. Don't put all your eggs of re-election in the national selection of the life president aided by country doctors on Vomaka in the hands of a criminal who was not sophisticated enough to skip New Bell Prison. When you wake up on October 8, the day after your so-called presidential selection, when you wake up that morning and find out that the road linking your residence at Etudi has been excavated by pushes, preventing you from picking up another presidential term, your eyes will never know a dry season, especially when Ambazonia would have successfully amputated itself from the Balok you still call a country.